Canada is highways and gas stations, catalytic converters and exhaust pipes, and we can't get from one place to another without fueling our cars with dino juice. There's perhaps no better time than now to ask, as our forests burn and our sea levels rise, what if we didn't have to? What if we could fuel our cars with hydrogen, the H2 in H2O?
The concentrations of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere has hit a record high this year.
Car emissions make up nearly half the pollution in the air right now.
Question over the price of cleaner air.
Somebody actually asked this question in the 1800s, which is when the first engine was made. And it wasn't even a gasoline engine, it was a hydrogen engine. But it's been 2 centuries, and people are still asking the same question. What if we fueled our cars with hydrogen? And perhaps more importantly, why did we stop? My home here in Metro Vancouver is actually the heart of hydrogen innovation today. Some people even call it the Silicon Valley of hydrogen. If all of this innovation in hydrogen is happening in my backyard, where are all of the hydrogen cars? I wanted to find out why Vancouver. I found a local authority on hydrogen.
I'm Matthew Klippenstein, Regional Director for Western Canada for the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, and Executive Director for Hydrogen BC, which is the affiliate in British Columbia.
It starts in the late 80s, early 90s. There's a man named Jeffrey Ballard, and he's a geophysicist. He did some of the earliest work on hydrogen fuel cells that was coming off of a patent in the US space program. And he thought that there was something here, that with hydrogen, there was a way to drive us around town without generating greenhouse gas emissions. And enough people believed in his idea, and that formed the foundations of the hydrogen innovation ecosystem.
Ballard Power Systems raised a phenomenal amount of money, something like $700 million Canadian. They've been using that and nursing that balance to be able to advance the technology.
The technology he's talking about is essential to a zero emissions hydrogen car, and it's known as the hydrogen fuel cell.
So this is a hydrogen fuel cell stack. Before we get to the stack, we might talk about what the hydrogen fuel cell itself is. It is a cousin technology to the battery. The magic ingredient in the fuel cell is a membrane, a thin plastic film, which allows the protons from hydrogen to go across without the electrons, so it can react with oxygen without causing combustion.
This part is important because the climate solution that we're looking for in transportation is an alternative to combustion, because gasoline-fueled cars combust all the time. That's what's changing our climate, and we see it in the exhaust that comes out of gasoline-fueled cars. If hydrogen fuel cell cars don't combust, then that's a solution we need.
Introducing the Toyota Mirai, the pinnacle of automotive ingenuity. Powered by hydrogen, this isn't just a car, it's a revolution on wheels. Embrace the thrill of driving without compromise, without emissions. Feel the rush of power without leaving a carbon footprint. The Mirai leads the charge towards a cleaner, brighter future, fueling the drive to hydrogen. This is not a real commercial.
So we have our solution. I drove the solution, but why aren't we all driving the solution? Does anyone know about the solution? Let's find out.
I am not.
No.
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 Hydrogen cars, not necessarily.
Hydrogen? No, I am not.
I think depending on the price, yes.
I would, but it would also depend on like the price.
Yeah, if it was affordable, yeah.
How much does it cost up front?
It sounds like hydrogen is losing the race to gasoline cars. That's according to Stefan Power, who's a manager of technology and economic analysis at Clean Energy Canada, which is a think tank that's based in Vancouver.
There are producers that are trying to offer tech solutions at a competitive price that can compete with the incumbent technology.
Right.
And if they can do that, then it means there will be uptake of this technology in the market. And where it's not possible because incumbent technology is too cheap, then that's where we need government support.
The thing is, our incumbent technology, gasoline, isn't naturally cheap either. But the fossil fuel industry in Canada has benefited from government support for years in the form of subsidies. It's about 4.8 billion Canadian dollars, we think. And that's according to the International Institute for Sustainable Development, who doesn't even know for sure because governments aren't entirely transparent about it. This year, Chevron spent $53 billion to acquire another fossil fuel company, just as ExxonMobil also spent $59.5 billion to do the same. Now, the industry is doing well, so well that these are all signaling long-term outlook that fossil fuels are going to remain a part of our future.
Well, I'm George Benson. I'm the Senior Manager of Economic Transformation at the Vancouver Economic Commission, which is the City of Vancouver's economic development agency. I grew up in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. As someone who works in climate change, I feel like I had a kind of unique introduction to this work before I even realized it, because I grew up in a boom and bust town. We've been in a boom for, 150 years, if you like, in terms of the fossil fuel economy. And now, as we look at the degradation of all the natural systems we depend on, I think a lot of us look down the line of that and see a bust coming.
I spent some time at COP28, and it was well regarded as the beginning of the end of fossil fuels. And Canada recognizes this too. By fall 2024, Canada is expected to announce a plan to end domestic financing of fossil fuels. And it even budgeted 83 billion Canadian dollars for clean technologies. But how do you bridge the gap between what governments fund as solutions and what we eventually use as consumers, especially when it comes to hydrogen fuel cell cars?
I think a lot of people are familiar with the idea of the bell curve. Early adoption, we're supporting innovation, we're trying to drive those brave few individuals or organizations to take a look at something. As the amount of people adopting it increases, now we start to think about more education and incentivizing the more regular people to pick that thing up. Then as we get to a certain kind of tipping point, we start to say, okay, I think we need to start making whatever this thing is, the thing that people need to do. So as we get further up, we push things via regulation and policy so that eventually, what I like to say is that the good thing becomes the easy thing.
I was curious about what infrastructure exists for hydrogen in the first place. And I found out that there are only 3 hydrogen refueling stations compared to the hundreds of gasoline stations across Metro Vancouver. This is Tom Ung. He's a station and distribution engineering manager at HTEC. And we're on the way to a hydrogen refueling station in Vancouver. Tom actually used to work as an engineer in the oil and gas industry, but has now found a new home in hydrogen here in Vancouver.
And so this is one refueling station that we're driving, but there are a few others in the city, right?
We have, yes, in Vancouver, there is 3 in the Lower Mainland, soon to be 4. UBC's coming up for that. There's 1 in Victoria and another in Kelowna. So right now we operate total 5 stations, soon to be 6. That's one of the things that I found as a parallel to oil and gas knowledge and here is that oil and gas does the same thing. They integrate different technologies to make a fueling station.
And you're saying how there are plans for more in the pipeline.
Yeah, we plan to put in another 20 stations in the next few years here.
While HTEC modeled hydrogen refueling after gasoline refueling, that doesn't necessarily mean hydrogen refueling stations are easy to build. HTEC produces their hydrogen through a process called electrolysis, which is when an electric current splits water into hydrogen and oxygen. Now, the thing is, HTEC doesn't produce their hydrogen through electrolysis at the site of the refueling station. They actually produce it somewhere else, and they truck it into their refueling stations when it's necessary.
The sources actually come from an electrolyzer that we operate and maintain in Surrey. We actually drive it up here, and we also have another fuel source that we work in a partnership with Ballard.
This is a lot of work, and even though he mentioned that there are plans to bring in more than 20 hydrogen refueling stations, it's going to take a while for all of this infrastructure to come to life.
I do know that there aren't many hydrogen production plants around and where to refuel, I guess. So as of right now, I would not.
Knowing that, then the chances would go down probably significantly, yeah.
No.
If we're going a long distance just to get like fuel for it, then it's probably not going to be, I guess, that much worth it.
I think I could definitely be convinced to yes.
So this is the classic chicken and egg challenge that the hydrogen sector has faced. The thing that holds us back at the moment in Vancouver is the availability of clean hydrogen. There's very little available, like less than 0.1 tons per day. Now that's still enough for about 200 hydrogen fuel cell cars that we have. In about a year and a bit, we should be up from 0.1 tons to 1 ton per day. That'll allow us to start doing some things with trucks and other portable generators. In about 3 years' time, we should be around 20 tons per day. And using that, we can build hydrogen into our transport ecosystem more.
But it's going to take a while for this new infrastructure to come to life. And anytime I had a conversation about infrastructure for hydrogen cars, something else kept coming up: electric cars.
The one thing that is really super important for Canada to achieve its net zero goals is electrification. I think the International Energy Agency and so many other analyses have shown time and again that electrification is relatively low cost and very efficient way to get a lot of emission reductions. 1 in 5 new passenger vehicles sold are battery electric vehicles. Hydrogen has kind of lost the battle on that front.
Electric car.
Probably electric.
Probably electric car. At this point, I'd probably get an electric car just because there's more stations.
If we revisit the adoption curve to compare between electric cars and hydrogen cars, electric cars are probably in the early adopters, maybe early majority, where it's picking up in support with the infrastructure to match, versus hydrogen cars are probably still in the innovators category. And there are a few reasons for this.
One of the reasons that batteries scaled up faster than hydrogen is that, well, first, everyone has electricity. Not many people had hydrogen on its own. Another is that batteries were already being produced at a phenomenal global scale. So maybe 25 years ago, the worldwide ability to manufacture fuel cells would have been maybe a couple hundred vehicles per year. Like, that was it. And so understandably, batteries, which have this very large capacity already, and ever more every year, have been able to scale up and use existing infrastructure.
Wait, if electricity is more efficient than hydrogen from a cost and infrastructure perspective, what's the point of scaling up hydrogen?
Well, if you have clean electricity, then why would you make hydrogen to turn it into electricity again for a vehicle? That's a fair comment. The mundane reality is that the efficiency isn't always the only consideration. With larger vehicles, for example, we have weight considerations.
You just get a different alternative for a different option to use. One of the challenges is with battery is you're going to need to hook up your car for hours at a time. I mean, you can use a Tesla supercharger, those are possible, but then you run into reliability issues for degrading your battery after putting it through a very high temperature application. As well, there's also the problems with extracted mining resources to create these batteries. So hydrogen, basically, there's not much else except just a holding tank, which is uses to fiber wrapped tank. And the hydrogen produced by electrolysis has a lot more, as much equivalent or even more energy storage than what a battery can.
In some long distance, heavy duty trucking, for example, it could be really that clean hydrogen has a leg up.
In the United States and Europe, the typical maximum weight for a tractor trailer, a Class 8 semi, is about 80,000 pounds. In Canada, for various reasons, we go up to 136,000 pounds. Hydrogen really excels in those situations because with battery vehicles, even if you could charge them quickly, the batteries start to get very heavy and they start to take away how much weight you have left for your cargo.
What about supply? We already generate so much electricity versus hydrogen, not as much. Does hydrogen even have an advantage here?
One challenge with electricity is that we have constraints on our transmission. It takes, currently at least, a very long time to build out additional transmission. We will need to build a lot of transmission across BC, across Canada, to provide the additional electricity we'll need for our vehicles and so forth. One thing that hydrogen has is that every stage of making hydrogen is a private organization process. Someone makes renewable electricity, say, someone turns it into hydrogen, someone trucks it, someone brings it to the fueling station, someone purchases it. The challenge on the direct electrification side is that you generate a clean electricity, that's wonderful, then you have transmission that you need to go into. And that's kind of a collective action problem. How fast can that additional transmission be built? And then you have a private company will sell the electricity to a private person driving their vehicle. So hydrogen does have a cost challenge. That's always been there. We continue to work on it. Direct electrification has something of a collective action challenge. What hydrogen offers is the ability to make everything into a private transaction, and then you truck the hydrogen where it's needed. We're very supportive of all collective action efforts to upgrade transmission, to upgrade distribution, to make sure everyone can get their batteries charged. Hydrogen has this kind of relief valve where you don't have to wait on the collective action of distribution expansion. It's a great safety valve, basically, to have. Humans aren't known for our great collective action skills.
Hydrogen cars can be a better alternative to electric cars in certain situations. They're more efficient at refueling, and they're more efficient at hauling heavy-duty trucks. Will people adopt it? That's up to the market. But I still have an unanswered question. How are we going to create enough hydrogen for it to be a viable solution?
Now, the question then is, how do you get that hydrogen? You want the hydrogen to be cheap, you want it to be clean. One way of doing this is by using natural gas, by using methane. And so in some places which want to continue using natural gas to generate hydrogen, there is agreement that they have to sequester, they have to capture and then bury the CO2.
I thought that hydrogen could be a substitute for fossil fuels. And now Matthew's telling me that we need to continue extracting more fossil fuels so we can make more hydrogen to then substitute for other fossil fuels in our transportation. What?
Canada has a humongous geography, so even though we have very water-rich areas with cheap renewables, such as BC and Quebec, we also have areas without as much water and with very cheap natural gas. Alberta, for example, is very interested in being able to use the natural gas to produce clean hydrogen while burning the CO2.
And the more I looked into it, the more I learned. It's not just Alberta that's interested in using fossil fuels to produce hydrogen. British Columbia and pretty much all of Canada is too. And that's because this country is a fossil fuel producing country, after all. And even if we look globally, the reality is that most of hydrogen production today is based on fossil fuel technologies. And that's according to the International Energy Agency. In 2022, 70% of the energy requirement for dedicated hydrogen production was met with natural gas, and 30% with coal.
A lot of people are understandably a little bit cautious around hydrogen because historically it's been produced from natural gas. Historically it's linked to the fossil fuel sector. The response that I would have to that is that, well, first off, we didn't have carbon pricing until relatively recently. So all these decades-old pieces of equipment which generated hydrogen, understandably, they were made for an era where we weren't worried about CO2. The other is that thanks in part to the advances in Vancouver and other areas, the technologies to generate clean hydrogen have come down radically in price, a little bit like the pancaking of solar panel prices. Historically, hydrogen had been mainly a concern for the fossil fuel sector. In a growing fashion, it'll be a fuel dominated by clean energy sector companies.
Now, there is growing demand for more sustainable hydrogen production pathways worldwide. Take the United States, for example. They announced a number of clean hydrogen production pathways under its Inflation Reduction Act. And over in Europe, the European Union wants to both produce and import 10 million tons of clean hydrogen by 2030. But the thing is, this is still a long way from where we need to be. In 2022, low-emission hydrogen production represented less than 1% of total hydrogen production. So when I look at HTEC and how they produce and distribute low-emission hydrogen, I look at it as an example of how difficult it is to bring these new solutions to life. How could hydrogen be a climate solution for Vancouver's transportation? I initially thought that it would be a good alternative to gasoline, but I realized that it's not that easy. Now, perhaps a better question to ask our experts is, what role do they think hydrogen is going to play as a climate solution when it comes to our local transportation?
When hydrogen first came out, it was going to solve every single problem. And now, as we see the work of people like Michael Liebert coming out, it's going to solve specific problems. Is it going to be for passenger vehicles? Probably not. But we've kind of learned that. We know that process now. That's how innovation and the economy work. We learn as we go. And I think we should consider that a success, actually, that we know where it's going to work and where it's not.
Hydrogen is not a silver bullet. I mean, they rarely exist in practice. And so it's really important that we're strategic and thoughtful about the sectors of the economy and the applications that we use hydrogen in. Electrification is a very good option, and especially in a place like BC where you have a very clean grid already today. I think it's very important how this hydrogen is produced. Even clean hydrogen technologies vary, so not all of them are clean to the same degree, and there are differences, and they need to be determined with life cycle assessment to make sure, to be also sure what exactly are we talking about.
When I explain the role that hydrogen has to play in helping us through the energy transition to the climate crisis, I sometimes use this lobster, a professional prop, not a personal keepsake. And the interesting thing about a lobster claw is most of it is in like the fingers part, and you have a little small thumb as well. So in a net zero world, we might expect about 90% of the energy that humans use to come from electricity, directly from electricity. The other 10% is hydrogen. So in this sense, hydrogen is a complementary technology. It's like the Robin to the Batman of direct, clean electricity. It still has a role to play, though, because without a huge amount of hydrogen, we won't get close to net zero.
I think that part of me wishes that hydrogen was as straightforward of a climate solution as I initially thought it was. It would have been amazing to have just replaced all of our gasoline cars with hydrogen and know that it was a better substitute and a better climate solution. But the reality in thinking about how much it costs, how it's produced, and even its role in transportation is perhaps representative of why we haven't solved climate change yet. Climate solutions can't purely solve for the problem of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And when it comes to transportation, while it's amazing that hydrogen fuel cells don't produce emissions when they're in use, there's still this whole surrounding ecosystem of economics and policy and society that needs to work in order for hydrogen to work too. That's a big challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And that's why industries and governments and societies are so excited about hydrogen as a climate solution.
There are a bunch of reasons why Canada, and BC in particular, are well poised to take advantage. The first step we need to do is to get the fuel. While we're waiting for that to happen, a lot of folks are working hard on that, then organizations like ours are working with trucking associations and other groups to make sure everything else is ready so that we can kind of click like a good power play.
If Canada is to achieve its net zero goals, then hydrogen will play a role in that. It offers a lot of employment opportunity for workers all across Canada. In BC, hydrogen consumption technology is one of the sectors that is poised for the strongest growth, something like 25% growth per year out to 2050, where eventually in the province it could be something like 13,000 people employed in that area. And I think it's something that people often tend to forget when they think about clean tech solutions. There's an employment opportunity behind it.
I've been thinking about a few questions. Are we going to rely on fossil fuels in the scale-up of hydrogen? How do we ensure that fossil fuels do remain short-term? And ultimately, what role is hydrogen going to play in the net zero world that we're building?